Welcome back to the deep dive. I've always thought about the world and myself, I guess, as just a collection of separate things. Me, you listening, this microphone, the trees outside, all distinct individual entities.
Right, that's the common sense view, isn't it? How we usually navigate things.
Exactly. But what if that whole picture, that basic assumption of separateness is actually, well, fundamentally flawed? What if our deepest understanding of self, of intelligence, maybe even reality itself, has been based on this idea of isolation that just isn't true?
Hmm, that's a powerful question.
It is, and today we're plunging into a really mind-bending work, Entangled Selves, a unified theory of connection in biology, physics, and mind by Skylar Fiction.
Sounds fascinating.
Oh, it is. Our mission for this deep dive is basically to unpack how insights from biology, psychology, and yeah, even fundamental physics seem to be pointing towards one single, really profound truth.
Which is?
That connection isn't just like a nice feature of life, it's the essence of it, the deep structure.
Wow.
So we're going to take you on this journey, starting beneath our feet, in the forest floor, then looking at the devastating effects of extreme isolation on humans, and finally diving into the weird world of quantum particles,
Quite a range. Biology, psychology, physics.
all telling the same story, according to this book, all revealing what Skylar Fiction calls the myth of isolation. So let's start with the forest. Okay, so imagine you're stepping into like a really old forest. It's quiet, cool, smells earthy, damp soil, decaying leaves.
I can picture it. Big, ancient trees.
Exactly. Huge trees reaching for the sun. And for ages, we've seen them as, well, individuals competing for light, water.
The classic survival of the fittest model applied to trees.
Right. But what if I told you that beneath your feet in the dark soil, there's this constant, silent conversation happening, a huge hidden world, almost like a superorganism.
Okay, you've got my attention. What are we talking about?
It's the Common Mycorrhizal Network, or CMN. You might have heard it called the Wood Wide Web.
Ah, yes, I have heard that term. Fungal networks, right.
Precisely. But these aren't just random threads. They're incredibly vast, complex underground lattices made by these specific fungi, mycorrhizal fungi.
And they connect the tree roots.
They literally intertwine with them. It's a symbiotic thing. They create this living, organic superhighway connecting different trees, even different species.
A highway for what? What's moving through it?
Vital stuff. Water, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus. But also, get this, chemical signals, like warnings.
Warnings, so they're
Yeah.
communicating.
That's what the research strongly suggests. And crucially, the book emphasizes these aren't just passive pipes. They're active, distributed systems. They facilitate mutual aid, adaptive behavior.
So like intelligent behavior.
Well, the source says they bear an uncanny resemblance to neural networks or information webs. It's almost like the forest floor itself has a kind of distributed brain.
That uncanny resemblance. That's where the science gets really interesting, isn't it? It's not just a nice metaphor.
Not at all. There's real evidence.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at the work by Suzanne Simard and her team back in '97. That Nature paper was pretty groundbreaking.
What did they find exactly?
They used isotopic tracers, basically tagged carbon molecules to track where resources went. And they found this net transfer of carbon between ectomycorrhizal tree species in the field.
So trees were sharing food, even different species.
Exactly. Not just competing. Actively sharing vital stuff through these fungal networks. It was like the first really solid proof backing up that wood wide web idea. Showed trees weren't just isolated fighters.
They were connected, helping each other.
Profoundly interconnected, yeah. Engaged in mutual support.
And has that research continued?
Oh, definitely. It's deepened our understanding quite a bit. Take Byler and her team's study in 2010. They looked specifically at rhizopogon fungi and Douglas fir trees.
And what did they add to the picture?
Something really fundamental. They found that individual fungal genets, these are genetically identical fungal organisms, can link multiple trees, sometimes dozens of meters apart.
Wait, so one single fungus?
One single genetic individual, yeah, stretching out, connecting lots of different trees. They call them genetically identical but spatially extended entities.
It messes with your idea of an individual, doesn't it?
Completely.
Mm.
It utterly blurs the lines. It forces you to think about maybe a collective form of intelligence, one that's not in one place, but spread out, embedded in the whole ecosystem.
So the fungus is the individual connecting the individual trees. Wow.
It really makes you ask, What does individual even mean here? And it's not just about sharing resources either. It's about communication too.
Right, you mentioned warning signals.
Yeah, Gilbert and Johnson's work in 2017 showed this clearly. Plants connected by these networks can send out warning signals to neighbors when attacked by pests.
How does that work?
So say one tree gets hit by aphids. It releases certain chemicals, maybe jasminates, into the fungal network. Those signals travel through the mycelium to nearby trees.
And the other trees, they react.
They do. They ramp up their own defenses, produce anti-herbivore toxins, that kind of thing, before the pests even get to them.
That's amazing. Like an early warning system.
Exactly. And what's really striking is the speed. These signals travel faster than would be possible by airborne means alone.
So the fungi are definitely playing an active role, not just passive conduits.
Absolutely. They're active participants in this ecological communication. It suggests these networks provide real evolutionary advantages through shared awareness. It paints a picture of cooperation, not just pure competition.
It really does. It's revolutionary, actually. Because if this is happening, it totally forces us to rethink what intelligence even is.
Right. Away from the human-centric brain in the skull model.
Yeah. These fungi, they don't have brains, no neurons, but they adapt, respond, coordinate. It's sophisticated stuff. I read Adamatsky in 2021 even suggested fungi process information in ways comparable to computational systems.
He did. He floated the idea of biological computation, or even more provocatively, proto-consciousness.
Proto-consciousness, that's a huge leap. It makes you wonder, what if the mind isn't just in the head? What if it's in the network?
An emergent property of connection.
Maybe. Their behavior seems to emerge from these complex relational feedback loops, right? Not from some central command center. It implies intelligence isn't confined to brains, it's like everywhere.
And this biological insight connects really powerfully with some bigger theoretical ideas floating around now, particularly in post-humanist ecology.
Like whose work?
Well, Donna Haraway's stuff from 2016, for instance. She argues pretty strongly that agency and cognition are not exclusive to humans, but are properties of entangled life.
So intelligence isn't just a human thing. Fungi, networks, they can have agency too.
That's the idea, moving beyond anthropocentrism. And it resonates with older ideas too, like interbeing from Buddhist philosophy.
Interbeing, how does that connect?
Well, the mycorrhizal world really forces us to think of life not as these separate atomized things, but as fundamentally interconnected, everything arising in dependence on everything else. That's interbeing.
So the forest isn't just a collection of trees.
It's maybe more like a mind. Plural, dispersed, alive. This whole picture of connection in nature, this wood-wide web, it's a really stark contrast for what happens when connection is, well, obliterated.
Okay, so from that thriving, interconnected forest, we're making a hard shift now, to its polar opposite, really. Extreme isolation. Solitary confinement.
A stark contrast indeed. From thriving relation to its complete destruction.
Yeah. We just saw how connection seems to be the basis for intelligence, for survival even. So what happens when you systematically sever all those relational threads for a human being?
The results are devastating. It shows just how essential connection is.
And for anyone listening who isn't sure, solitary confinement, it often gets these bureaucratic names like administrative segregation or special housing units.
Euphemisms, yeah.
But the reality is confining someone in a tiny cell, sometimes literally the size of a parking spot for 22, 23, even 24 hours a day.
With virtually no meaningful human contact. It's profound social isolation.
And it's not just for a few days. The American Friends Service Committee points out that many people spend months, years, sometimes decades like this.
It's a deliberate, sustained severing of human connection. Originally maybe meant for short-term discipline, but often used long-term now.
And the impact, it's not just psychological, is it? It seems neurological, too.
Absolutely. The evidence from neurological studies, prisoner testimonies, it all points to the same conclusion. The human mind is simply not designed for isolation. It breaks down.
What kind of breakdown are we talking about?
Dr. Stuart Gratian documented this extensively back in 2006. We see terrifying symptoms, hallucinations, both visual and auditory, crippling paranoia, hypersensitivity to sounds. A tiny noise can feel overwhelming.
That sounds like torture.
It is classified as such by many. There's also severe memory loss and these really bizarre distortions of time, hours feeling like days, the past and present blurring.
And Gratian drew a parallel, didn't he, between these symptoms and...
Yeah, chillingly they resemble the effects of traumatic brain injury or acute cytosis.
But without any physical injury.
Exactly. It seems to arise purely from the deprivation of relational input, of the echo of self that others provide.
Yeah.
The mind, starved of feedback, just starts to unravel.
That echo of self, that's powerful. I read the testimony of Ahor Lutalo, who spent 22 years in solitary.
Unimaginable.
He described the mind's gradual erosion. He said, "You hear voices, you talk to yourself, you pace. Your thoughts are no longer your own."
Your thoughts are no longer your own. That hits hard. It speaks to that loss of identity, of agency.
It feels like it goes beyond just psychology. It feels existential.
I think it is. The source calls it a slow ontological death, a negation of one's place in the human matrix. The very structure of your identity, built on interactions, just crumbles.
And the time distortion you mentioned, Craig Haney wrote about that too, right?
Yes, Haney's 2003 work showed that without routine contact, environmental shifts, meaningful engagement, time loses its linear flow. It becomes this suffocating repetition, an ever-present now without context.
Because there's nothing to anchor it, no interactions.
Precisely. It really drives home the point that selfhood isn't this static thing inside us.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally a relational construction that requires the presence of others to hold its shape.
Like an ongoing conversation.
Exactly. You need that back and forth, that reflection, to maintain a coherent sense of I.
And Skylar Fiction draws this really unexpected parallel here, connecting the psychological collapse to quantum physics.
It's a fascinating leap, but yeah, the idea is that just like a quantum particle can be in an undefined, probabilistic state until it interacts or is observed, the human being in extreme isolation, deprived of relational input, also begins to decohere, loses that stable sense of personhood,
Right.
becomes indeterminate in a way.
Wow. So we literally need others to keep our reality coherent.
That seems to be the implication. We don't just perceive ourselves through others, we become ourselves through others. And without them, that becoming falters.
And this has real-world consequences. The UN considers long-term solitary confinement torture, right?
Yes. Juan Mendez, the special rapporteur on torture, was very clear in 2011. He classified it as causing severe mental pain and suffering, violating the Convention Against Torture.
Yet it still happens, widely in some places like the US.
It does, which makes you question, what does this practice reveal about our understanding of being human? The source argues it's more than just a prison tactic. It's a theological rupture.
So.
Because it fundamentally denies the premise that to be is to be in relation. It violates that core interconnectedness we see everywhere else.
It confirms that idea of the self not being a sealed container.
It's like an hourglass, as the book puts it, held upright, given shape by the presence of others. Without them, it collapses.
This devastating human experience, how does it possibly connect to, like, the fundamental fabric of the universe? That's where quantum physics comes in.
Right. So now we dive even deeper into the really strange, almost unbelievable world of quantum mechanics. Picture this. Two tiny particles, electrons maybe, born together.
Okay, created in the same event. Then they fly apart, across the room, across the galaxy, light years apart. Doesn't matter how far.
Oh, okay.
The instant you measure something about one particle like its spin, is it up or down, the other particle instantaneously, no matter the distance, snaps into a correlated state.
So one is measured as spin up.
The other one is instantly spin down. Always. They're linked.
That's quantum entanglement.
Exactly. And it's not just theory, it's experimentally proven. It totally undermines classical notions of separateness, doesn't it? It shows their states are somehow part of a single system.
It's profoundly weird. So weird that even Einstein hated it. He called it spooky action at a distance.
Right. He couldn't accept that instant connection across space.
Yeah.
Seemed to violate the speed of light limit.
He, Podolsky, and Rosen wrote that famous paper in 1935 questioning it. But experiments proved Einstein wrong on this one.
Which experiments were key?
Elaine Aspect's work in the 1980s was crucial. Building on John Bell's theoretical work from the 60s, Aspect's experiments with entangled photons basically slammed the door shut on any classical explanation.
So entanglement is real. Undeniably real.
Undeniably. And the implication is massive.
Yeah.
In a quantum universe, nothing exists in total isolation. Everything is fundamentally, inherently relational. Particles, possibilities, maybe even people.
And that's the connection back to solitary confinement, right? That eerie resonance.
Exactly. The idea that just like a quantum particle's identity is fuzzy, probabilistic, until it's observed or interacts, human identity also seems to depend on that relational context, that observation by others. Without it, we decohere.
Lose definition, like an unobserved particle.
It pushes that idea further. We do not merely perceive ourselves through others, we become ourselves through others. Our being depends on inner being.
Wow. And is entanglement just a subatomic thing, or does it play out on bigger scales?
Well, that's the really exciting frontier now, quantum biology.
Yeah.
There's growing evidence suggesting entanglement may operate in biological systems too.
Like where? What kind of systems?
One classic example is bird navigation. How do migratory birds sense Earth's magnetic field? The leading theory involves entangled electrons in cryptochromes, proteins in their eyes.
Entangled electrons help them see magnetic fields?
That's the hypothesis.
Yeah.
And photosynthesis, too. The incredible efficiency plants have in capturing light energy might rely on quantum coherence, maybe even entanglement, to funnel that energy with almost no loss. Lambert et al. Wrote about this in 2013.
So life itself might be harnessing quantum weirdness.
It really suggests that life itself leverages quantum connectedness, meaning entanglement isn't just some microscopic quirk. It could be a fundamental principle of how things are organized, how they function, maybe even how they live.
That's mind-blowing.
It is, and philosophically, it opens up huge questions. Liu et al. In 2021 explored entanglement as a possible non-local foundation for consciousness, challenging that old mind-matter split.
If particles are linked non-locally, maybe consciousness isn't stuck in the brain.
Perhaps. Some, like Amoroso back in 2001, even suggested quantum non-locality could explain subjective experience itself. And, it's not just physicists thinking like this.
Oh.
Ancient spiritual traditions have similar ideas, like the Buddhist concept of dependent origination, pratikyasamutpada,
With
the idea that nothing exists independently. Everything arises only in relation to, in dependence on, other things. It's a strikingly similar worldview to what quantum physics seems to be telling us.
So across all these fields, physics, spirituality, the message is the same. No separate self.
That seems to be the convergent point, which makes solitary confinement seem even more horrific, not just psychologically damaging, but
Ontologically wrong, violating reality structure.
exactly, forcing someone into a state that nature itself seems to forbid. The book puts it beautifully. We are not singular entities. We are entangled events, mirror particles of one another, seeking resonance in the void.
Entangled events. Wow. Okay. So we have the forest, the prison, the quantum realm. How does Skylar Fiction weave all this together into a unified theory?
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. The forest floor buzzing with fungal intelligence.
Where connection creates a kind of distributed mind.
Then the horrifying collapse of self in solitary confinement.
Where the absence of connection leads to dissolution.
And finally, the quantum world, where entanglement shows fundamental non-separateness.
Where relationship is baked into the fabric of reality.
And across all three, it seems like the same principle keeps emerging. Connection is life, severed connection is death, or non-being.
Precisely.
So Skylar Fiction's core idea is that these aren't just parallel discoveries. They're all pointing to one huge realization. Existence itself is relational.
That's the central thesis. It's not just a feature, it is the nature of reality.
Let's try and weave those threads together more tightly now. How does the evidence build this unified picture? We'll start again with mycelial networks. They behave with eerie intention, right? Coordinating, warning, sharing resources through complex signaling.
Defying individualistic models of intelligence.
Absolutely. Showing that evolution doesn't just favor competition. It favors entanglement over domination, reciprocity over competition. Synergy is key. It's intelligence emerging from the network itself.
Okay, point one, networked intelligence in biology.
Then point two, solitary confinement as the inverse proof. The breakdown proves the necessity of connection.
When the relational mirrors are removed.
The self dissolves, time distorts. The mind cannot maintain its own borders. It's an ontological collapse triggered by violating the fundamental need for relationship. It shows the self isn't in us, but between us.
Point two, relational construction of self in psychology.
And point three, quantum physics refuses the idea of the autonomous self at the most fundamental level.
Particles are born entangled, their fates linked.
Meaning, the self-contained unit, whether it's an atom or an ego, is ultimately an illusion born of scale. The deeper you look, the more interdependence is all there is.
Point three, fundamental relationality in physics.
Exactly. Forest, prison, quantum field, all telling the same story.
So the idea is these aren't just analogies, they're facets of the same truth.
That's the core argument, that we fundamentally do not exist apart from the systems we are nested within.
Yeah.
The individual isn't a singularity.
But a node, a breathing knot in an infinite pulsing tapestry, I love that image.
It forces a massive reframing of intelligence and consciousness, doesn't it?
Totally. The human brain isn't the only seat of sentience.
Just one configuration among many. Fungi compute without neurons. Particles influence each other non-locally. Minds shatter in isolation because the self is formed between.
So what does this new ontological model, this relational self, actually look like? What are its components?
Well, fiction outlines a few key shifts. Intelligence isn't centralized, it's distributed. Consciousness isn't bounded, it's co-emergent through relationship.
Okay.
Trauma isn't just internal, it's a rupture in connection.
Hmm.
And reality isn't made of things, it's woven from interactions.
Wow. That has huge implications.
Immense. It demands not just scientific rethinking, but ethical transformation.
How so?
Well, solitary confinement becomes not just inhumane, it is anti-reality. Ecological destruction is not just tragic, it is suicidal for us as part of the web.
And things like extreme individualism.
Capitalist individualism, the book argues, is not just unjust, it is ontologically false,
Yeah.
built on a fundamental misunderstanding of how reality works.
So what fungi, physics, and the imprisoned are all screaming.
You were never alone.
Yeah.
That separation was the illusion all along. Hashtag tag outro.
Okay, wow. As we come back from that really deep dive into Entangled Selves, that core message just hits you, doesn't it? The deepest error of modernity is the belief in separateness.
It really reframes everything.
Yeah. Skylar Fiction lays out this powerful case, drawing on biology, psychology, physics, showing that connection isn't just helpful, it is life.
From the forest floor intelligence
To the self unraveling in isolation.
to quantum particles linked across the universe.
The conclusion feels almost inescapable. To be is to be in relation. That feeling of a separate ego, maybe just a hallucination of scale. The soul, if you like, isn't just inside us.
Is between us.
Yeah.
And this isn't just about understanding things differently. It really proposes a new foundational model, this relational paradigm.
Where everything important, intelligence, time, being, even healing, isn't an individual property.
But emerges from interbeing, from the relationship.
Which is a massive call to action, really. It demands we rethink
Oh,
everything.
pretty much. Psychology needs to move beyond the isolated mind model. Physics needs to see relationality as fundamental, not just metaphor. Ecology becomes an internal ethic, not just external science.
Justice means not just freedom from cages, but freedom from disconnection.
Exactly. And even how we design technology, like AI. Should it just be efficient, or should it reflect entangled empathy, foster connection?
This isn't mysticism, the book insists.
No. It's biology. It's physics.
Yeah.
It's the documented pain of isolation. It's about survival. It's framing the future.
So the final thought, building on the book. To live truthfully, maybe we have to build societies, technologies, even our own sense of self in ways that weave connections, not sever them.
Because we were never separate.
We just forgot.
Hmm.
Thank you for joining us on this incredible deep dive. We really encourage you to sit with these ideas, explore them, see how they might shift your own perspective on yourself and the world.